introduce the panel, which I'm calling the Fab Four. So you're supposed to scream when I finish. It's Pete Jones, Paul Munkholm, Matt Powell, and Shareen Pathak will be speaking to us. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. We haven't even started, and we're already a hit. So I'm really excited for this panel. So when the lovely ladies over at the 4A's sent me an email and told me about this, what I really liked about the panel was sort of this idea of looking forward. A lot of times we do tend to talk a lot in the agency and ad industry about each other. Sometimes it gets, we're talking to each other to the point that it gets very insular. And this is one of those panels that I love doing because we're actually going to be not talking just about us. We're going to be talking about a lot of things that affect human beings as we sort of move forward into this really new post-digital age. So the panel is called Designing for Technology Before It's Developed. And I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, not your whole bio, because you've got really great bios, but just one sentence, and then we're going to get going. So I'll start off. My name is Shareen Pathak. I am the Brands and Agencies Editor at Digiday. So what I really focus on is how brands and agencies kind of adapt to new digital landscapes. So sometimes that does include figuring out, creative strategies for technology when there hasn't been a precedent for that technology before. So I'm really excited to do this.
I'm Matt Powell. I help run the New York office of Kirschenbaum von Senecal & Partners. I'm a software engineer by background and started our creative technology boutique Spies and Assassins.
Hi, I'm Pete Jones from Framestore, New York. I help run the VR studio there. We're digital content creators for virtual reality, and we're really good at it.
You are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Munkholm. I'm the Director of Strategy at a digital agency called Kettle. We're headquartered in New York, and we're also in the Bay Area. We provide a range of services. We build websites, apps, use a lot of sort of new technologies, and work a lot with the Apple Watch and smartwatches. And we like to say we're dedicated to helping brands thrive in the digital world, because it's kind of a new world out there. And so what is their place in it? What should they be doing? Where should they be? And, how can they connect people and all these sort of new things that are coming out? So it's a very exciting panel to be on. And,
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're going to start with Pete because while, when we talk about new technology, some of those technologies are beyond sort of even the reach of us here. But we're talking about robotics and skin sensors and all these other things that are still in development in really early stages. But Pete works really closely with VR. And I think VR is at that interesting point where a lot of people in this room have probably tried it, used it. Who has at some point or the other gone through a VR experience? Yeah, pretty much everyone. Okay. But there's still a lot of questions about the future of VR and where it's going to go. So let's define our terms. I mean, do you consider VR an emerging technology?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think that it's actually quite surprising how it is being immersed in it every day. You sometimes, are shocked almost, which is, sort of ridiculous sort of frame of mind to be in. But, like, really, you haven't put a headset on yet? What are you doing? What are you doing with your life? But the truth of it is that obviously, outside the sort of advertising bubble and, a certain, niche group of people, these things aren't commercially available yet. I mean, they are very shortly going to be on the shelves, and I think that's going to be, a massive story of 2016 when Oculus start rolling out their consumer units and PlayStation follow after that. But for the time being, it still is, a very, very small section of people who've got access to it. And even the sort of cardboard units which are out, which, you've probably seen, there's been a lot of publicity around New York Times last week, who brought out their branded cardboards, which went out 1.1 million to their subscribers, which is probably the biggest launch, the biggest push. We're really happy to. This wasn't a planned little bit of promotion for us, by the way. I'm just to answer the question, but we were really proud to be a part of that launch and generating some great content for that. But that kind of does throw light on the fact that this still needs so much behind it. It is very much by its nature an emerging technology, and it'll take. Just as you think, this is so much buzz behind this, it's so exciting, it's so interesting, and everybody's into it, and everybody's behind it. When you actually open that into a world sphere, the reality of how far there is to go is pretty sort of daunting. So I think it's important to keep at the forefront of your mind all the time that we haven't really done anything yet. We haven't really scratched the surface yet. And it's all very well to project over the next 2 months or 2 years or whatever that, I think this is why, Oculus, Palmer Luckey are very, it always seems like they're, you're rallying to back yourselves a bit, guys, because they're always saying like, oh, listen, they're almost saying, listen, it's going to be rubbish, it's not going to work, everyone's going to hate it. It's like, you wanted to have a bit more confidence, but, if it does catch on in the way that everybody thinks it is, the reason why people have put so much capital and money behind it, then it is going to, hopefully grow into that thing where it's touching billions rather than thousands and hundreds. But yeah, there's a long way to go, but it's definitely still at that seed state, yeah.
So you used the word buzz, and I think that's a great place to start off, because I think with emerging technologies, especially in our industries, buzz drives a lot of things. But buzz sometimes doesn't drive actual dollars. Just because VR is the next big thing, especially 2 years ago when everyone was talking about it, doesn't mean it actually will lead to the promise that you've made. Matt, have you got an example of a buzzy technology that maybe you worked on or maybe somebody else worked on that just never panned out?
Well, I think buzz is a huge part of all this, because the only way you can get anybody to spend money on stuff like that, if only hundreds of thousands of people are going to see it, is if it makes a lot of noise. And so we kind of think as they're like celebrity, they're like a way of amplifying newsworthiness. So First Story is amazing, and in some ways, the story around the thing that you did and the content of how you made it and all that stuff becomes as important, as anything else. And I think when we make things, we plan for the content around the buzz to be as important as the thing that we're making. And it's the primary thing we use to make the client comfortable with the economics not making sense otherwise for doing it first.
Have you got an example?
Yeah, so for BMW a couple of years ago, we did this thing at Bryant Park called the Eye Window into the Future. And the whole idea was try to show, it was before they launched the i platform, the i3 and i8, like right before. And so it was trying to show the cars of the future on the streets of today. So it was a computer vision thing that would turn traffic on 6th Avenue into, these future cars. Cost like $750,000, and it's just in this one place. And so, how do you get the client to care that that's enough? And the film that we made that we used as a case study, which is great because I didn't pay for it, was the thing that lived on YouTube. Right, it was part of the brief. It was part of the thing that we made, and millions of people saw that. So the first is a way of creating a media moment in some ways, and then for people like us that like to make things, it underwrites the making of the thing.
That's interesting. What about you? Underwriting always through buzz, or
well,
maybe
I'm
something else?
yeah. I mean, I'm sort of shaking my head yes and no. Like, buzz is important. It's important to have awareness around things. But we always get clients coming to us and they're like, we want 2 million people to download this. We want 100,000 people to download this app or whatever it is. And you can spend a lot of money. You can create a lot of buzz, and they can come and they'll download it. They'll do kind of what we want them to, and then they'll never come back. They'll sort of go away, never use your app again, never sign up again. It's not really moving the needle for your brand. It's not really moving, any of the metrics that you really have. So I'm just I think there's a balance between buzz and utility. Mm-hmm. So, buzz is great, absolutely, get awareness out there. But I think that when these things start to sort of become closer to our realities, sort of more within our grasp, it's when there's that clear utility of something, okay, this is actually like, holy crap, I can do this now. Like, that's that moment that I think is when things become sort of more, meatier both for the user and for the brand. So I'm just sort of, I think there's a balance.
You're in the middle. So on back to the buzz thing, and then sometimes buzz works, like in the case of your BMW example. Also worked, for example, with all the work that you guys especially did with HBO and Game of Thrones a few years ago. Give me an example of buzz not working. Doesn't have to be work you did.
All of ours is great. Let me think. Okay, I hate to say it, but the smartwatch category. It's this amazing technology that's out there. Like, holy crap! Suddenly we're like living in the future. Like, I've got this thing on my wrist, and I can be, like a spy. I can talk into my wrist. It's all this great stuff. Everyone's talking about it. It comes out, and the software doesn't totally match up with the hardware, and it's sort of like, well, I've got all these great apps on my phone, but not necessarily using them right on the watch yet. It doesn't really make sense yet. Suddenly people are questioning, why the heck am I wearing this thing on my wrist anymore? So, there was great buzz around it, and I'm a big believer in smartwatches and wearables, and I know that the future, I bet everyone in here can imagine 3 years from now when we're gonna be doing like amazing stuff with the Apple Watch or any smartwatch, but right now, that buzz isn't really paying off, I don't think.
Google Glass is an example of this, right? Something that people went bananas about, and then
Yeah.
like the only people that you could really see wearing them were when you went to get your Google Glass, and there'd be like all these cool, attractive, well-dressed people in Google Glass, and you watch what they did when they walked out, because I stood outside and watched at Chelsea Market, is they took them off, right? So you can't even get your employees to wear the product, and that's an example, I think, of the technology being the point, not the magic, and I think that's why the stuff that Pete does, everybody loves, because the tech is an enabler of an experience that frankly, they'd probably do awesome stuff at the Framestore if they were doing it on big screens and not in VR anyway that would blow your face off and that you talk about. So the point has to be, if it's tech-led, if the client calls and says, give me this thing made on this technology, then probably the first thing to be asking is, what are you actually trying to do? Like, what's the magic moment you're trying to create? It can't be about the tech.
Right, absolutely. I did see somebody wearing Google Glass last night at a barbecue joint in Brooklyn, so.
Were they getting yelled
They're
at?
still alive. They're still alive.
How
I
many
think
friends do we think that person has?
There's something in that as well for brands, which is that you can almost sort of go through the looking glass a little bit with really cutting edge emerging tech, which is that your user comes away saying, you know, virtual reality is amazing, not, you know, your preview for the Supergirl TV show is amazing. You know, you're going to go away thinking, I want to do more of the whatever platform it was, not watch the TV show. And I think, you know, that's a fine line. And, you know, obviously for any sort of content generator, content providers, you know, don't really give a shit about that, to be honest. Like, you know, that's kind of, you want to get to that point where everybody's loving what you do, but that's not, you know, that's not what you're missing the point. And I think if you don't find that sort of natural horizon line that brings the tech to the point of you know, which meets what you're selling seamlessly, then that results in sort of losses, which, you know, leads to sort of disinterest, and you've kind of got a hole there then.
Yeah, that's true. What happened, I mean, when you were first starting to really do a lot of VR work, what was that experience like when you know, people came to you and said, oh, I want something like that Game of Thrones thing you did, or I want something like that, and sometimes it doesn't work for that client or doesn't work for that project. I mean, did that happen? Did you say no?
That happens about 15 times a day, to be honest. It's sort of, it's the challenge that anybody's got of any sort of emerging technology, and especially when it comes to, you know, things which rely heavily on visual effects or, you know, computer-generated images. I think that, you know, the best idea to have, the best outcomes come from the brands or clients who come in and who are interested in the technology and use that as a good starting point. And then, you know, partner up with whatever content generator it is to find something that resonates without trying to shoehorn a concept into that tech. I think you'll always end up, you know, that's kind of, it's one of those last minute things, isn't it? You know, we've got can you turn our linear 30-second TV ad into a VR thing? It's like, well, yeah, technically you can, but it's going to be crap.
Right.
And so that's the sort of thing that comes across quite a lot. The stuff that's really successful and is the stuff where you've approached it from square one of something that's suitable for the technology that you're using. You know, you've got to throw out a lot of the stuff about, you know, what you're used to seeing for TV or film in a linear format. You know, the techniques that you use to make films and ads and stuff, which thrill us so much. You know, you can't in VR you can't cut, you can't dissolve. Yeah. You know, you can't hijack the camera. You can't have any focal plane changes. You can't defocus. So everything that we use to tell stories is useless completely. Yeah. So if you're trying to sort of move, you know, seamlessly from that kind of, you know, that background or that discipline into VR, it's not going to work, and you end up having to unpick it all and start again. So to answer your question, they're the ones that come in and say, you know, can you reappropriate this? Can you shoehorn this? And or
reappropriate yes, the experience you already made, right? That's the other way. So it's either make my 30-second spot VR or do that thing you did for the other client this way. And you're like, well, that doesn't really work for you. Like, we get asked all the time to make things that are like the eye window but don't make sense. I had a fashion brand that, you know, that wanted to, like, well, change everybody that's walking by into wearing our clothes. And I'm like, A, that's a bad idea. And B, the tech is a magic trick. And so if you don't understand the magic trick, then you can't pull the sleight of hand you're trying to pull to suspend disbelief. Mm-hmm. And so it's funny. You have to have the right ask of someone who's, like, to your point, curious about the thing that you did, but also open to developing a new idea that makes sense at the intersection of the tech and their brand. Like, what is it, Century 21, that thing in Times Square where they would, like, pick people out? It was like they understood the magic trick. They built something that made sense for them, and they made it work. You know, you can't do it arbitrarily, right?
But then what you were saying about the Apple Watch then, because, not the Apple Watch, sorry, smartwatches, but then you have to create for an imperfect canvas. And sorry, but you're gonna have to create something for the smartwatch because maybe the tech isn't there, but it's something that's going to happen. So you're working not only with we're gonna talk about measurement in a bit, but no real measurement of how that works. The canvas itself is imperfect, maybe there's a lot of technical problems, then what do you do?
Well, I mean, I think the point about sort of porting over like one thing from another is a great point. When magazines first came out on iPad and it was basically a PDF scan, you're just kind of going through. It's like, what the heck am I doing? So what's the point of this? But it's really about, okay, how do we a perfect product needs to satisfy the brand, the user, and the technology. So you can't do 2 out of those 3. You can't do 1 out of those 3. You got to do all 3. So how do you do all 3? So for smartwatches, you need to look at them, and not just the screen size that you're designing for, but look at the entire environment around it, and look at the relationship between the watch, the phone, the screen, all the things, how they work together, and figure out that ecosystem. And so it's not just about sort of porting over, but think about the ergonomics of what does this mean now that we're doing this all the time, and looking at that broader picture and designing for that. And yeah, there's limitations, but so now you have to figure out, okay, within these limitations are great for creativity. Limitations make you have to come up with solutions. So okay, I've got this thing to play with. Now what can I do with it? So. It's possible.
Yeah, just adding on to that, actually, this idea of limitations, helping you. I mean, that is you couldn't have said it better for virtual reality. That's exactly what it's like. We've got the first thing we like to do is when we get any new client in who's having a demo for the first time, is give this big list of things that you just can't do, which is the opposite of everything you're taught in how to win business, isn't it? It's just a big list of no. And because for the simple reason that if you move a camera around in the headset, you're going to puke, and that's not what you want ideally. And if you do this, you're going to puke, and if you do this, you're going to fall over. But the outcome that you actually have is that puts you in a place then where you're forced to do something which is totally unique, taking you away from those ideas, and that's a really exciting spot to be in, because then you've got a brand or a client who's sitting there thinking, okay, well, can you help us then do something that's interesting? And you're like, yes, that's gold dust.
I think against what you're asking, I think part of it is you can't design to the tech, you have to design to the human that uses the tech. Right. So you don't know how people are going to totally use the watch. You don't know everything about the way that the standards are going to evolve. And so if you start to build to smartwatch as tech instead of like problem and human, then you're kind of going to be screwed. Right. But if you build for problem and human, then if you get the implementation even 80% wrong, you can tune your way there, because the idea itself is rich enough that people will roll with you to get there. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So you can't, that's why things like, do I know whether the airlines or Marriott or the hotels have nailed things like using it in the same way we use the phone to check in and unlock the door? I don't know if they have from an experience standpoint or not, but I know guaranteed that everybody likes the idea of it being easier to get on a plane and into a hotel room. They'll figure the implementation out, and people will roll with them while they get there, versus if you just build around the tech in a narrow box. Like, for instance, I don't know if Apple will be able to get people to participate in haptic messaging.
Mm-hmm. No,
It doesn't matter.
I think that's a great point. I just want to sort of add on to that, because I mean, honestly, in so many ways, we're kind of in this global beta phase. Companies are just putting products out there, whether it's an app, whether it's a piece of technology, and they're letting us sort of help them. It's a two-way street. It's not, hey, this is my technology, bend to it. I mean, they know that it's going to be, okay, here's technology. How are you going to use it? Okay, now we're going to iterate. And it's really, exactly, people, if it's solving a problem, there's going to get some traction eventually. If it's solving a problem in a new way, that's when you're gonna have that aha moment of holy crap, I can't believe I couldn't do this before.
But being in global beta is, and I love that term, but being in global beta is great if you're the company putting out a product and then letting the consumers iterate for you. Where you guys are, if you're trying to use that product and to potentially reach a consumer, do you have that room for possible error or failure the first or second or third time around?
I think so. I mean, so it's a different conversation that we have to have with our clients and our partners now. It's not about, okay, here's this big shiny thing that we're going to launch, and I hope it's going to hit those 200 million or whatever, views, downloads, et cetera. It's really about getting them in that mindset. It's much more kind of like how startups operate now. And it's really about helping them understand, okay, we've got this great technology, we've got these behaviors over here, we've got your brand and your assets. Okay, what are some hypotheses that we can come up with? Okay, we think if we do this, we're gonna we're going to achieve that. So we're going to create an experiment to do that, and we're going to get some feedback on that, and then we're going to iterate based on that, and we're eventually going to get to your goals. But they need to, and there are so many precedents for that in the startup world that they're starting to get it. You know, less and less they're saying, just give me some big splashy thing. I mean, of course we all want that, but they're understanding that, okay, let's create something. So I always go back to this great quote from the founder of Airbnb, Brian Chesky. He would rather have 100 people who love his product than 1 million people who kind of like it. And so it really is about figuring out, okay, what are those things that you know, the smaller population is going to like? How do we isolate that? How do we understand that and scale that out? And clients more and more are starting to embrace that way of measuring and are more comfortable with it if they see the, you know, the eventual finish line versus, you know, and it's a lot less risky for them too than spending $10 million, $100 million on something that might not work. So,
For sure. What about measurement? Since you brought that up, there aren't, you know, if you don't have specific metrics against which to measure whether something's working. Well, like, how did you do it for BMW, or how did you do it the first time you sort of started selling something on VR? Like, how do you know if it's working, if people are liking it?
I think it depends a lot on the thing.
Right.
You know, it's very different thing to thing. And I think that this is like another, as long as the conversation starts with what's the business goal, then you're always measuring success against that. And if you can't measure that, you're kind of screwed, right? Like, so it might be hard to measure, you know, with traditional ways to feed into your Omniture dashboard how much time people spent under the headset. But do you care? You know, whereas like I know what you guys did, we're more looking at what was the experience, what do people do after they took the headset off after the Game of Thrones experience? That's the right
a lot
question.
of the time.
What's that?
Puke.
But you know what?
Not anymore.
What were people saying about it? How were they talking about it? How did it change it? Like, that's what really matters. So if the goal is get people talking about Game of Thrones, the question is, did it? And that we can measure.
Yeah.
You know? So I think the trick is don't get caught up in letting the tech lead or letting the tech be about what you're measuring. Ultimately, we're all in business, if we work for publicly held companies, to drive shareholder value. There's a place to measure. It's just a question of where you put the stick. So for BMW, you know, we looked at things like, well, how many people walked by and saw it in the street?
Okay.
How many people watched the YouTube video? But more than that, like how much demand was there for the vehicle, you know, on the outside? And of course, there's other programs that are happening and stuff, but you're trying to pay attention the best you can to how each of those things is driving the conversation overall. So it's very dependent upon what the thing you're making it, what the new tech is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, other than the puking, what else happened after?
Yeah, I should probably reiterate that we're sort of beyond that stage now, for the most part. It's usually the developers who are puking now rather than the consumers, which is a good thing. I mean, for the time being, for us, it's still very much, you know, all about eyeballs. It's you know, I mean, we've got people kind of on certain things that we've released, running metrics and talking about media impressions and the number of people going through experiences and that sort of thing, which is fine. But I mean, you know how hazy all that sort of thing can be a little bit, and you know, I don't know if anybody really cares about stuff like that because it's not really driving any revenue, is it, at the end of it? But you know, now we're starting to get that stage now where we're going to be shifting units and we're going to be selling games, selling experiences. You know, downloads and the advertising revenue that goes with downloads and ways to generate revenue. So as we get into that stage, which is really going to be the acid test over the next sort of 12 to 18 months for VR, then we'll be able to manage that a lot better. But one interesting thing on that, though, you know, that we're starting to notice about the way brands think about these experiences is that how that you can see the cogs are starting to turn a little bit, you know, on kind of the agency side about, you know, what matters. And you know, because you know, do we measure? For example, I saw one of the metrics for the New York Times experience was the amount of time people had spent with the app open or watching the videos and that sort of thing, whether that be, you know, at any one time or shared, whatever, which is quite interesting. But you know, does it really tell us much about what the takeaway is from that? You know, somebody could spend 20 minutes in an app watching a video going, look how rubbish this is, everybody. So you don't really know. I'm not really sure how much, you know, there is to learn by that.
And there's also a novelty factor right now, right?
Exactly, yeah, for sure.
How long does that stay?
Until people are parting with their money, we're not really going to know, you know, what the efficacy of what we're doing. But you know, needless to say, we're fairly confident.
Do you ever feel, Pete, like as one of the, like now that VR is sort of getting into a little bit more of a mainstream, and I know it's not there yet, but since you were one of the first early uses of it in this space, do you feel a sense of responsibility? Because, like, imagine if you were the first brand to do the Google Glass thing, and then you messed up, and then everybody thought Google Glass sucked because of because of that brand, which is very much possible. I think 3D TVs are a really good example of something like that happening. Never worked out. Do you feel responsibility?
Totally, yeah. The responsibility is enormous, and you know, we've been through it once before. So there's that to look back on and say, oh God, you know, let's not do that again. And I think that, you know, we were kind of very lucky in a way because you know, it's not what we traditionally have done as Framestore in the past. Our background's been in making, you know, Hollywood movies, CG for Hollywood movies and TV commercials. And our sort of digital arm has been traditionally very small. And, you know, one day we kind of got our hands on one of these headsets and we're like, right, let's bin everything else off because it's boring anyway and it's not making any money. Let's just put everything into this, which it turned out was a great decision. And because we're in a unique position, we're able to marry up, you know, our teams of amazing Hollywood standard CG artists and plug that into a new platform. And that's put us at the forefront of things where there is an enormous amount of responsibility. The danger is that if somebody, you know, there's a lot of this going around now. There's a lot of you know, people are able to get, you know, some GoPro rigs and go out and shoot stuff, which is brilliant and freeing. And you know, the more people are talking about virtual reality from our point of view, the better. However, you know, if somebody puts on a headset and takes it off, at the moment they're going to say, "Oh, virtual reality is crap, isn't it?" They're not going to say that example of virtual reality was not up to scratch, and so you run the risk of, you know, disenfranchising people, you know, at the get-go. I think at the stage we're at now, I think we're pretty confident that there's enough momentum behind it that we're going to get past that. And once it starts getting into homes, but yeah, the responsibility is there, and also just generally, you know, raising the standard. You know, we don't want to be just the world leaders in what we do. We want everybody to be doing it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, kind of that definitely gives you some sort of ownership over it, I think. Do you feel responsibility for?
Yeah, I think sort of, you know, there's a few ways to look at it, but I think a bigger issue is sort of tolerance these days, where there's different levels of tolerance for different categories and different types of experiences. So, you know, a new experience that is in a category that is, you know, very much about helping the user do something they could never do before. People are like, okay, I'm game, I'm gonna play with it, kind of like you were talking about before. Like if it's sort of getting there, people will come along. But, you know, tolerance for, you know, standard design practices, for bad content, for things that are just, you know, crappy UX or whatever, the tolerance is, you know, nil. So there's sort of, it's figuring out, okay, what can we get away with here? Because it's not a perfect world. We are sort of writing a lot of these rules as we're going along. So how do we play in that space?
Yeah. So you're saying tolerance has actually gone down. I think were people more willing? You think were consumers more willing to accept a less perfect version of a technology?
I think so. Especially when there was more novelty around it. You know, I mean, look at the web 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, it was hideous. It was foul. I mean, look at it now and you get a headache. And so, but you know, it was so new. There was like, holy cow, I can do this. So, but now as that novelty wore off and it sort of became sort of table stakes for, okay, I can do this in a couple different places. This place is doing it in a much better way than this place is doing it, and so I'm going to go there. So
that's because early adopters have a different value set than the mainstream, right? So that's the difference. It's when things are all with early adopters, what they're interested in is what's possible, not what's happening today. Mm-hmm. And so the thing they're doing is a telescope into the future of what could be. But when things go mainstream, it's not like that. It's like the reason I need Uber to work is because I need a ride and it's raining. Like, so it's not cute that you can call a car like it is when you can first do that. And it's just kind of cool because, like, wow, I summoned a car. But you're like, no, seriously, I'm soaking wet. And like, there's a crying baby here. I got to get the hell out of here. You know what I mean? So I think that's the difference is like once things stop being technology that technologists play with, or as more people fancy themselves technologists, this is more of a part of our language, the burden of interaction is just higher. It's like, why would I do, take Philips Hue, for example, right? Which is really rad and super fun if you like want your lights, Philips Hue, you know, if you like want your lights to tell you the temperature.
That people don't know what it is.
You know, the Wi-Fi connected LED lights that can change colors and you can plug them into if this, then that, make them do things. They're fun. I have them. I like them, and I like them mostly because I can turn the lights from normal to like a little darker for the evening to way dark if I'm watching a movie, and that's pretty much it. But it's still kind of a pain in the ass. So like my dad would never use them, right? I remember when I had Wi-Fi and it was too much of a pain in the ass for my dad. Now take my dad's Wi-Fi away, he will punt, you know? So it's about whether or not the thing is critical to what you're trying to do. And at a certain point, I don't care how cute the tech is, for most people the light switch works really well. And an app is a pain in the ass. And so you have to, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you think like 10 years ago, there were still companies calling themselves internet companies. Imagine somebody calling themselves an internet company now. You're just a company. Everybody uses the internet. Yeah, exactly. .com. I mean, I saw a movie the other day when it's so weird to hear somebody say, "Oh, we're called Google.com." Like, come on, mate. You know, come on, granddad.
The www.
Yeah.
The World Wide Web. you say?
HTTP. But I mean, and that's exactly what will happen. We won't be talking about virtuality. Not to keep banging on about virtuality, but that's kind of why I'm here. You know, in the next sort of 4 or 5 years, hopefully, we'll be at that point where we're not talking about virtuality anymore. That we're talking about flat screens versus, you know, CRT TVs. It's just going to be another part of your at-home smart tech.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I'm going to ask you guys just to try and be the predictors of the future here for a sec. Just give me technology, and we can't use virtual reality, but just a technology that you think is sort of right now at the cusp of maybe turning into the technology that everyone's going to be obsessed with, say, in the next 5 years. I think you mentioned haptics, and I think that would fit the bill, but the possibilities for that, and the challenge if somebody came to you tomorrow and said, you know what, 5 years from now, this is going to be a 5-year-long client project. Can you imagine?
No.
With an
Suddenly we work at
unlimited
fraud
budget, and you can make as many decks as you want, and you're going to be our agency of record, and you're just going to work.
You guys hear that agency dig? She was like, you can make as many decks as you want. That's not cool.
Sorry.
Writer.
A lot of decks.
And no thanks.
Yeah, right. I gouged my eyes out with a fork. I think for me, I don't know if this is too. If this is like avoiding the question, but what I get excited about is the continued reduction of, or the continued like passivity of interaction with technology, right? So like I don't know that any of the smartwatches have it figured out. I know that my Philips Hue, as previously stated, is cool but annoying. But I think that what's really interesting that's happening now is computers are less and less places we have to go, like wells to draw water from, and there are more and more things that interact inside of the natural interactions that we have. They're more ambient. Mm-hmm. So what gets me excited is the march of ambientness of technology. And that's, I think, for me, what I think is going to be most transformational in our world. And I can't call the form factor of it, mm-hmm. but the predictiveness, the power of data, the power of interconnectivity, and the shrinking size of sensors and processors just makes the world a much more interesting place. Mm-hmm. Things get easier and more intuitive. And so that's the coolest shit for me.
Yeah.
Like not having to your point, talk about VR, but just having.
Can I talk about VR again now?
Yeah, dude, hit VR, man.
Can't talk about VR anymore. VR is banned from now on. No, but back to you. So I'm going to push you just to give me an example, only because if you've read something recently that you were just like, wow, that could be the future, or that could be it for us.
Again, I think presentism screws with that. Like the Back to the Future anniversary just happened, right? How many things in that are hilarious now to look at? Like there are video payphones, which makes all the sense in the world when Back to the Future 2 was made, and it sounds like nonsense now because my payphone's in my pocket. Right. So I don't. It's hard to call those kinds of specific form factor things, but I feel like the reason why things like watch and glass and your iPhone even are interesting is because what they do is put the you and the power of all of us together, the network together, and that I think is what's really interesting and transformational. So like, people keep asking every year, and we're still asking this question, is it going to be the year of mobile? It's kind of all the year of mobile. Computers used to be the size of a warehouse. You had to fill them with punch cards if you wanted to use them. Now, like what's in your pocket can do more than what like the entire, a technical university's computer department can do. And so like what happens when there's more of that? Right. And so like I'm interested in like wearables in terms of like, miners, for example, in open pit mines in Australia have to wear all this stuff like to make sure that they don't get either run over by a big truck or that they're not in a radioactive place. And you can't really hear it and you can't really feel it. It's big and bulky. When you integrate stuff like that into clothing, those people's lives change. Their lives are safer, right? When haptics and sound and all of that stuff are embedded in what they do. And that's what I think is really cool. And watches are like, this like embarrassing first step in the direction of it, like a square wheel. It's sort of in the right direction, but not at all. So I can't call the form factor.
No, and I think not being able to call the form factor is right what we're talking about. That is the challenge of designing for the future, that you don't know what it looks like. What about you? Non-VR.
Yeah, I mean, the one that kind of is, exciting and terrifying is AI. That's the next step. We're thinking, well, that's going to be the thing that once we sort of start cracking that, and it, hopefully it doesn't turn on us and destroy the human race.
Hopefully,
it's going to be the thing that changes the most. But it just feels quite far away at the moment. I think in the meantime, we can already see the evidence of what 3D printing is doing, and I think I heard on the radio this morning the first car that you can print with resin and build yourself, and it actually works with a combustion engine, which, I mean, even 5 years ago that was sort of incredible. And the Internet of Things as well, and how that's connecting all things together. But the problem with a lot of these things is that they're not accessible to most people. These things need to go through those. Like massive companies on Microsoft or Apple, or, who need to put those things together. It's not like putting your TV and your home stereo system together and being a bit clever about your surround sound. Like you need to be able to program these things. You need skills to be able to do this, and you need to have a UX design for it. So it's now out of the reach of the common man.
And which makes testing difficult, right? I mean,
exactly. So yeah, unless in your garage you've got 20 sort of university graduates who can come and program for you all day, and then you can test the hardware out on the UX. You used to be able to do mechanical things like that at home. You could be an inventor. You can't really do that anymore. It has to come through these these enormous organizations with sort of infinite resources. So I mean, that's kind of the flip side to it. But I think when we start to really see those things kicking off, but 3D printing perhaps, but definitely the Internet of Things, but the only limitation of that is that you're reliant on somebody else doing it for you, which is a bit of a shame, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to end on a downer, like.
Jeez.
It bummed everybody out now, sorry.
Well, I was going to say VR, but no. And then these guys stole my
now
other
you
answers.
Take a shot.
So. Okay, predicting the future. Okay, I guess there's a lot of things I'm really excited about, but one for sure is medtech and what's going on in terms of, so I was down at South by Southwest earlier this year, and we were up for an award for, our cute little responsive website, whatever. It's like adorable, fine. And then someone sits down next to me and he puts his arm down that he built. That I'm just like, oh, what are we doing here? So there's this amazing stuff going on in medtech, and the stuff that you can do, that's going to extend our lives, make our lives better, fix things that we could never fix before, and that's just like, I mean, I know zilch about it, so don't ask me like, well, how am I going to measure it? But it's like, the stuff that's going on there. It's like that's when you look at technology, you're like, holy crap, we're like living in the future.
Absolutely, cool, awesome. We have about 3 minutes for questions, if anybody has any. Questions? About medtech, maybe?
VR questions?
I'm not a doctor.
There, I think. There's a mic coming.
Hey, I guess I wanted just a little bit about that medtech. I was thinking, I'm a biologist. I'm come from a totally different field, but doesn't it seem a little one-dimensional to think about? I guess technology. I mean, all this technology has to do with like chips, silicon, things that we make. But there's a whole like another side, like biology. And so I think biological hackers are like the geneticists that are out there. What do you think about interfacing biology with technology? So for instance, at neuroscience meetings, it was a couple of years ago, where they had, people recording EEGs, and they were moving a ball, just by thinking about it. So if you dream about the future, could you even move objects, just by thinking about it? I mean, they're kind of there. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
I hope if we're doing biohacking, we're figuring out a way to save the planet before we're picking up balls and moving them around personally. But I think even on the early stuff on this, to your point, medtech is really interesting. My dad's diabetic, and for most of growing up, he had to prick himself with a blood test 10 times a day and then give himself 3 shots a day. My dad is a baby for needles, keep bringing up my dad. And then he got a pump, right? And he's way healthier as a result of the pump, and it extends his life expectancy a ton. But he still had to test himself for blood and make adjustments to the pump. He has a new thing now now connected to another part of his body that's automatically analyzing his blood sugar all the time, and it talks wirelessly through his phone to the pump. So now he doesn't have to do anything, which is amazing. It's just way easier, and he's way healthier, and he can eat chocolate. Like, that's a big deal. It's a small thing, but it's a big deal. And like, I think, and you take that further, when you're doing biohacking, it's interesting. It's also freaking terrifying to see also AI.
Yeah, well, yeah, not only that, but I mean, all of these things are starting to have more far-reaching potential applications for, when the first thing you think about when you think about virtual reality is, wouldn't it be cool if I could go inside Call of Duty? But we're starting to get, more and more, people coming to our door saying, we've done some reading on, the therapeutic kind of, effects that it could have, and we've already done it with sort of music or light or whatever, working with kids, and so even can we transport somebody who's terminally ill totally out of their ward and take them away, and what is the efficacy of that? Can it really work? Has it got further reaching extensions than just entertainment? And the great thing about it is that we don't know yet. We're still finding that out. It's all very exploratory, but wouldn't it be brilliant and amazing if we could take somebody away from a horrible end to their life and give it some light at the end of it. So yeah, hopefully we're going to find that out.
I love that. I just want to add to that because I think what's really fascinating too is that there's this convergence of all these technologies. So it's not that there's one emerging technology out there, it's that all these different things are emerging kind of at the same time. So VR meets biohacking meets, a smartwatch. Like there's all these, things that can come together that as a, an ecosystem and as sort of like this environment around me can then help us, in unimaginable ways, because it's no longer like a sort of additive experience. It's kind of exponential because these things are converging together. So I think it's a super exciting area. So yeah.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for being on this panel. Thank you.